Remember the first time you fell in love? Were you a kid with a crush on a teacher? An adolescent in the grip of hormones, suddenly noticing potential partners? Had you been listening to your peers talk about that person who was really hot, and after a few conversations, you couldn't keep your eyes off them? Was it a rock singer, a movie star who claimed your heart for the first time? And though you knew your love was hopeless, you just couldn't dismiss it. Did you write your beloved's name in the margins of your school notebook? Fantasize about dancing the night away with them? Did you dare to confess your love at some point? Maybe send them a special Valentine? Like some daughters, I gave my first Valentine to my father. Well, the kindergarten teacher had instructed us to prepare Valentines for everyone in the class, and I dutifully followed those instructions using the store Valentines my mother had purchased for the occasion. But I decided I wanted to make a special Valentine for my dad. Probably while browsing Valentines in the store, I had seen one that especially appealed to me, but I wasn't receiving an allowance yet. So I memorized the text and the artwork and set about making my own version of it. The front of the card started out saying, "When I first saw you." And then opening the card, the sentence was completed, "My eyes popped out." Happy Valentine's Day. Ordinary romantic words, but the pièce de résistance of the card, what appealed to my 5-year-old imagination, were the cartoon eyeballs set on springs that literally popped out when the card was open. I thought that was terrific, much like the pop-up books I had seen in the library. I made the card out of construction paper and crayons and crafted my own version of popping eyeballs by folding strips of heavy paper into twin accordions with eyes glued on the ends. Anxious about whether the Valentine would be a success or not, I presented it to my father on Valentine's Day. He opened it, laughed out loud, seemed delighted as he thanked me. After my father died, my siblings and I were busy with the sad, necessary task of cleaning out a parent's house. I was going through dresser drawers in an unused bedroom, those sorts of drawers that become places to put things that didn't belong anywhere and had no particular use. Among the clutter of one of the drawers, I found that kindergarten Valentine, saved by my father for a lifetime. I was his first daughter. That was probably his first experience of receiving such an expression from a small child who was also a daughter. Though he and I would spend more of our lifetimes arguing with one another than affirming and appreciating one another, though we went through a period of estrangement and not speaking, still my Valentine stayed tucked away year after year, a symbol of a love that could never be erased or forgotten, no matter the circumstances that followed. Our worship services this month are taking up the theme of paradise, and for some, the experience of love is akin to an experience of paradise. A person in love tends to find everyone and everything rich in meaning, sees all the world as beautiful, finds the beloved to be sheer perfection. Meaning, beauty, and perfection are qualities that show up in myriad visions of paradise that spiritual traditions have offered for millennia. And central in those visions of paradise often is love. In paradise, love is the primary value. People dwelling in paradise know themselves loved without measure. The very air of paradise seems drenched with love. Outside of spiritual traditions, our culture surrounds us with shallow and misunderstood interpretations of love, and we're especially awash in those interpretations with Valentine's Day later this week. Our own Unitarian Universalist tradition, curiously, for a long time made no mention of love. It appears nowhere in the original 7 principles, core statements of who we are and what matters to us. But now the draft of Article 2, a revision of those principles, has reversed that odd omission and placed love as central to who we are and what we do. Perhaps those original drafters of those original principles and all the congregations that then adopted the principles and placed artistic renderings on the walls of churches kept deciding to skip any mention of love because it was just too complicated to trust that we could include it in a principle without inviting an argument about it. Or maybe we were hoping right along not to be drawn into a debate about just what love means in a religious tradition, since spiritual talk of love often quickly draws in another tricky word, the word God. I do wish the powers that crafted our 7 principles had taken on the challenge of including love in some form long before now, when we're finally making it central to who we are. That we've made this change recognizes the intensity with which all of us go searching for love, sometimes all life long. And given the overwhelming diversity of communications from our culture about what love means and what it looks like and how central it is to a life worth living, have some teaching from our own tradition about love is crucial. But even before this revision, we brought love into our midst, finding ways to demonstrate again and again what love looks like when we get to work bringing fairness, justice, and acceptance to people and places that need love. We have often framed those efforts with the phrase, siding with love. A curious phrase. Does love take sides? Or are we saying with that love is present whether we can see it or not? And then what does it look like that would make it hard for us to see it if we set aside cultural versions that tie love only into paradise and perfection? Remember the second time you fell in love? So very different from first love. Because along with the same flutters of heart, the same tendency to be overwhelmed at times, the same longing to be with the beloved, the same conviction that no one could compare to them because you'd found absolutely the finest person on earth. Along with all those delightful sensations, the second time around, you had a firm grounding in reality. Yes, the other person was wonderful, but they had their share of faults and could be blind to your need for reassurance and often just didn't listen to you. Yes, the other person was wonderful, but they tended to get so wrapped up in themselves and their own agenda that they trampled on your feelings. Able to see both sides now, you believed your love was stronger and more likely to last because you were not deluding yourself in any way. I did fall in love with the truly right person when I lived in the Twin Cities many years ago. The one who captured my heart came with an impressive set of good qualities and an equally impressive set of flaws. All of which I saw clearly well before we decided to marry. But at that point in my life, I'd had therapy, I'd been to seminary, and I'd been ordained, all of which I believe equipped me to form a marriage with a person who might be quite the challenge. And then the day came when that marriage could not continue any longer. All those issues I had seen from the outset, plus a few more I had not anticipated, crowded in upon us to the point where we could not stay under the same roof any longer. There did come a time after we had been divorced when we were able to realize the bonds we would always have with one another, how love had not ended just because we'd signed divorce papers. While our culture tends to talk of love in relentlessly positive terms, aligning love with joy and happiness and sex appeal and good feelings, that description only covers about half the reality of love. Because love involves an embrace of wholeness, a willingness to include the shadows as well as the brightness. Loving another person will always bring a fair share of suffering, anger, disappointments, all the negative sides of those delightful feelings that are showing up in our Valentines this week. It is misleading to believe that love is only wonderful, because then I'm likely to conclude that whenever I'm furious with you or want you out of my sight, whenever I'm disappointed in you, that therefore I must not love you anymore. How far can my love stretch to include conflict and pain before it no longer feels like love? Jungian psychologist James Hillman argues that growth in love must include the experience of betrayal at some point in order to deepen into a mature love. Yet betrayal again and again becomes grounds for ending a relationship, for believing that love has been cast aside. How can I ever see through betrayal to the possibility of continued love? Remember the last time you fell in love, when it was the love of a lifetime? Maybe you were re-falling in love with the same person you'd loved before, but your love had entered a very different place, came with a different set of feelings than you were used to. Or maybe this time you fell in love with a new person, but someone significantly different than the sorts of partners you'd chosen before. Or maybe you're holding a capacity for a whole new level of love, but still looking for the person to give that love to. This love, while it still came with some of those wonderful rushes of emotion that you'd seen accompany times of falling in love earlier, had another sort of emotional tone to it, seemed quieter, gentler, often not capable of being captured in words. In fact, this next time of falling in love was so different, you may have been unsure whether it even qualified as love or not. Bernard of Clairvaux, a medieval monk and reformer of the Cistercian order, may be best known for his writings about the stages of love. While he's focused on what love looks like in terms of one's relationship with God, his stages seem to me applicable to all relationships, not just a relationship with the deity. The first stage Bernard describes sounds barely like love at all, since everything is interpreted in terms of the self, and everything and everyone else is experienced as an extension of me. I love myself most of all. In the second stage of love, there is another party to the relationship, but this love is still primarily narcissistic. I love you for what you can do for me, and I understand our love in terms of my own well-being, my happiness. In this stage, I'm also likely to leave our relationship when you no longer make me happy or serve my interests. Not until Bernard's third stage does love begin to take on some dimension of maturity, when I become able to love you for your own sake, just because you exist and aside and apart from anything you might give to me. I love you because you're you. And that would seem to be the pinnacle of love. Yet Bernard saw an even further development possible in the final stage of maturing love, which he called love of self for God's sake. In this stage, I see myself as having infinite value and love myself just because I exist and not for what I do or who I know. Strange that love should end up focused on the self, since most of our experience of love is focused outward on giving love to another. Yet Bernard imagined a fully matured individual as having come to terms with who they are, and therefore able to give themselves fully to another. Think of how much our Valentine love comes in terms of how you make me a better person, or you complete me, or my life is fulfilled with you in it. Those perspectives suggest a self that is still incomplete, still requiring another for wholeness. Bernard believed, by contrast, that the best love comes when I know myself complete just as I am. Only then can I give myself fully to another, with no hidden agenda, no hooks, able to sacrifice for another, able to see another whole against the sky rather than in terms of what the other gives to me or does for me or means for me. The last time I saw my father, he was in hospice care, having taken to his bed and refusing to get up any longer. He'd spent the previous 5 years caring for my mother through her dementia until she died, and he seemed to just be done. My siblings and I were taking turns coming in to sit with him, often for long stretches of silence when he was simply staring off into space. Periodically, he would rouse himself for a bit of conversation and then sink back into his reverie again. Our last conversation consisted of his asking me a series of questions. Do you like your job? Is the church treating you well? Do you have enough money? Are you happy with your life? My father had often concluded that I could not possibly be happy with my life because it was so very different from anything he knew or had imagined for me. I was touched that at the end of his life, he wanted this daughter who had puzzled him and angered him and opted to live far away from him to be okay in the end. Judgments aside, he just wanted to be sure I was happy. And for once, my own judgments fell away as well, so that I only wanted him to be at peace. Perhaps we spent that final day at long last loving one another in the ways we had always hoped for and never found before. Love without expectation, love without needing the other's affirmation. Just two people sitting together in the sunlight in the afternoon. So is it love? I hope everyone enjoys the Valentines you receive this week, simply for what they say, and don't read too much into them. Or don't read too much into the Valentines you hoped you'd get but didn't get. Being in love is exhilarating, and of course everyone yearns for that experience. But love, as opposed to being in love, love is complicated and messy. Love includes a fair amount of confusion and experiences that are anything but the experience of paradise. Love waxes and wanes in intensity. And over the course of a lifetime, love comes in many forms, some of which we may not recognize as love until after the fact. So may we be willing to keep looking for love, looking at what we call love that is already with us, widening our vision to see the less familiar kinds of love that are all around us. And may we give one another and receive from one another the gift of being seen deeply, seen fully, seen whole against the sky. May it be so. Amen.